Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome to the show Tania de Jong. Tania is a soprano, social entrepreneur, businesswoman, professional speaker, and member of the Order of Australia, among many other things. She has also founded several highly successful charities that have brought thousands of people together to heal through music and singing. Tania's most recent charity is Mind Medicine Australia, which is helping to bring psychedelics into the fields of mental health and social well-being. A great chat for the first month of the year. Enjoy. Tania, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Nice. Nice one. Well, we have a traditional first question for first-time guests. Tania, were you a weird kid?
Was I a weird kid?
Yep.
Oh, I reckon I was weird.
How so?
Yep. Oh, well, all sorts of weird things. Like my favourite pop group, when asked, was Beethoven. That was definitely weird. My father had a Dutch accent. My family was Jewish, and I went to an Anglican girls' school. I had some very weird hobbies. Like I used to run magic shows, and then I also had a big shell collecting business when I was little. I was only about 10. And I used to collect stones and shells, and I had this tumbling machine, and I used to make jewellery, and then I had a little stall out on the street that I used to sell all this jewellery to neighbours and passers-by and so on. Yeah, I mean, our family was always very unusual. People always used to, and they still do, say that coming over to our place for a Friday night Shabbat dinner is like watching some kind of comedy or drama on the television.
Yeah, because you had, I was looking at the bio in preparation, your grandmother was an inventor.
That's right. So my grandmother invented the very first foldable umbrella in Vienna back in 1929. And it was a very significant invention, obviously. And she manufactured that successfully, and it was manufactured in a factory in Vienna for the next 10 years. And then in 1939, the Nazis came into Vienna, and my family's Jewish. And so it was really miraculous that she and my grandfather worked out a way that they would get out with my mum, who was only 3 months old at the time. They bribed a border guard to sculpt his bust. My grandfather was a very famous sculptor. And they got 3 passages out to Switzerland. Unfortunately, the rest of the family was not so lucky, and the majority of our relatives were killed in the Holocaust. It's tragic, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a refrain when we get onto the psychedelic stuff that I find very interesting with a similar background in that kind of ancestral lineage stuff too. But it's fascinating, isn't it, how lives kind of take on those sort of shapes? Because right there, you as a kid, there is already music and performance and entrepreneurship, and that's kind of nested in the story of having grandparents who are artists and entrepreneurs as well, right? So it's this kind of an ancestral business, if you will.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice way of putting it, and I haven't thought of it exactly like that, but you're absolutely right. Because it was quite interesting, because my grandmother, her sister Rella, was married a Frenchman, and it really was only because of Rella's ingenuity as well that her and her French husband, Marcel, saved most of the art and the sculpture in the basement of their apartment in Paris, so that when my grandparents left, they actually had to pretend to a Nazi Gauleiter, who was, one of the officers, that all of the art had already been sold, because the Nazis came to buy all the art and sculpture. And my grandmother, with one of her friends, pretended that it had all been sold to this German woman who was playing, this lady who was playing the role of a German woman, all explained in the book my mother wrote called Driftwood. But anyway, it's a long story. I won't go into it now. But I suppose the fact is the art was saved in a basement in Paris for decades until it started to come back to Australia all intact. But in the meantime, my grandmother started a very successful career as an actress on the Paris stage. My aunt, Rella. So the performing sort of comes from there. My father was also a very good violinist, but also very multi-skilled in a range of different areas. And then, of course, the art and the invention and the creativity is there right through my lineage. So, people always say, oh, how did you turn out like this? And actually, I like that terminology.
It's sort of a problem, isn't it? Because like my next question is going to be, and it's still going to be, how did you get into music? But we kind of we've almost done the at least the prologue for that, which is it in some respects it was you inherited it, right? It's something that the family something that was there in the family. But I mean, for you specifically, Tania, did you know did the kid whose favorite band was Beethoven always know she was going to be a professional musician?
No. So, we listen to a lot of classical music at home, hence why my favorite pop group was Beethoven. But I had always loved classical music, and I always thought I had a pretty strong voice. And though I'm Jewish, I went to an Anglican girls' school, like I said, and we used to sing hymns every day, and I'd stand up and sing in full voice all these hymns. And when we were 14, we could start having singing lessons. And I really wanted to have singing lessons. But, I had a lot going on. I was good at sport and I had a lot going on with school. And Mum said, wait for a while, you've got so much going on. And I'm a very impatient person sometimes. So I went round to my best friend who'd been learning singing. So I was pretty envious of this. And I asked her if she could teach me the song that she'd been, learning at her singing lessons. And she could play the piano. So we sang it through a few times together, and then she played piano and she said, you sing on your own now. And so I sang it on my own, and she then said, Tania, you'll never be good enough to have singing lessons. Don't bother having lessons. So I was 14 at the time, and of course, like young people in general, all of us, get these messages, and we often believe these things that are told to us, and I believed her. And so in the next year, I did backstage in the school musical. I thought, at least I can do the props. And then finally in year 11, I auditioned for the chorus of the musical Oklahoma, and to my amazement, I got the lead role. And so then I did start singing lessons, in earnest, and I started to really, make that more of a focus of something I wanted to do. But there was still always that little voice saying, you're not good enough, and all these sorts of things, because this sort of messaging sticks in our psyches.
Yeah.
And it took a lot to get rid of that. And actually, subsequently, a singing teacher when I was 23 told me that I would never make it past the chorus and that I should focus on my law degree, because I was studying law at the time as well as opera. And this person said this to me, and of course, I initially was extremely upset by this. I went out into the street outside her place, and I was in tears, and I was going, I've had enough of all this. I'm just going to go and grow bananas in Byron Bay. And I started a completely different life. But the next morning I got up and I just thought, no, I'm never going to let someone snatch away my dream again. And I started to work towards developing my solo career. But she did make things pretty hard for me. She spoke to the head of Opera Australia and told them what she told me. And so every time I'd go for an audition with the opera company, I'd have a panic attack, because I was basically psyched out by all of this. And so then what happened really was I started a group called Potpourri, which I started with my former partner, Jonathan Morton, and her wonderful baritone. And we started singing together and performing at everything from, little nightclubs to music societies. And then we added 2 more singers, and Potpourri started to become a very well-known group. And subsequently, all these years later, is still going, 30 plus years later. And we've performed literally in over 40 countries around the world, and many of the major concert halls, theatres around the world, and festivals and major corporate events as well. And we provided a living to 4 singers and a pianist, for a very long time. We're not doing as many performances at the moment. Obviously, the current pandemic has put a moz on all kinds of performing live, but generally speaking, we still do a lot of performances per year. We just don't tour as much as we used to because it was exhausting. I mean, there were some years where we were doing 130 performances with Potpourri, this opera, music, theatre, song, beautiful arrangements, lots of comedy and interaction with the audience right around the world. And we'd just be travelling all the time. So, it was a wonderful way to see the world, and a wonderful way to connect with different cultures around the world. And we had to learn a lot of different languages as well, because, often singing in everything from Mandarin to Italian and German and French and, all over the world, really. We'd learn a local song in each country we'd come to. But yeah, it was an amazing way to grow up and get a different perspective on the world, I suppose. And I've been very fortunate in my performing career, as well as the Potpourri performances we do. I have now really expanded my own solo work. So I've done 5 solo albums in the past 3 or 4 years. And I'm starting to do a lot more composing and lyric writing and just creative work of my own, which I'm really enjoying as well. So
Very cool.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And actually, at the moment, I mean, I mentioned before my mother's book, Driftwood. My big project, one of my really big projects for this year, is that we've turned Driftwood into a musical, a music theatre work, written by Jane Bodie, the Australian English playwright, composed by Anthony Barnhill, a wonderful emerging music director, and directed by Wesley Enoch. And we're going to have the world premiere of Driftwood, hopefully later this year, and then tour it. Amazing story.
Yeah, so I mean, just to go back to, did either that school friend of yours or that teacher get a life like that? It's always, sometimes I wonder, the people who tell you you can't do something and then you go out and barely convincingly know that you do. Do you think do you think they're in our lives to say that, to sort of spur us on to make sure it happens?
Yeah, I actually do think that's possible. Like, if I look at, like, the path that I was going down was a more traditional operatic career path, which would have been, going overseas, probably to the UK or Germany, and continuing my studies there and auditioning for the opera houses there, and probably having that more traditional career. I think that because of what was said to me, I had to become more of an entrepreneur, and that was already very much in my blood anyhow, as as you've pointed out and as we've discussed. And I think it suited me. So it was a lot of hard work. I mean, everything that we have created, we started from nothing, absolutely nothing. But there's an enormous amount of reward in that. And there's also a certain degree of flexibility in terms of, being able to pick and choose where you do perform, who you do perform with, the repertoire, all sorts of things, the style in which you're performing. We were very well known and really the instigators of, in the particular music theatre and opera form that we were working in to really break down that fourth wall between performer and audience. And we often broke the fourth wall, and audiences loved it because they felt like they were part of the performance and they could join in, and we'd go into the audience. And and a lot of performers still don't do that. Many others did copy suit, but then many others think, oh no, you never break the fourth wall. But I'm a believer that we're all in this together, and we want to create experiences where everyone feels part of something that matters, and that they're not just observers. They're actually part of something. So
I'm picking up something that is kind of interesting, given the subsequent charity work, which is an awareness the whole way through that music is participatory when it's done correctly, dare I say, right? But before we get to it, I asked this, so you're a professional musician who studied it and whatever, and I asked this of people who have jobs like that, because it's actually a really difficult question, but it's the lead into the sort of first charity type discussion. What is music, Tania? Like, what do you have a definition of it?
Oh wow, that's a difficult one.
Right?
Oh, music is food of the soul, the language of the heart. Music is the way that we connect in a non-verbal way quite often, because it's a wonderful other language that seems to cross all barriers between us. So music speaks where we often cannot, and music expresses emotions that we often can't fully express in words, and music can bring us together with others more closely and unite us more, and remind us of the harmony, the sense of oneness that we all have in this shared humanity, rather than something that divides us. Whereas unfortunately language can often be divisive, so I'm talking here more about music without words.
Yeah, sure.
In saying these.
Because I'm gonna the next one is sort of a follow-up of what is singing. But do you think it, because you said shared humanity, but what I'm sitting with is it just humans though? So how is what is fundamentally different about bird song and human vocalization?
Oh no, well, I don't think that much.
Yeah, right.
And if you think about, the dolphins or the whales, the songs, the mournful songs they sing to one another, that's a form of communicating. It is a form of communication, and it's a beautiful form of communication, because sometimes words can be confusing and pejorative, and words can make us feel judged or criticized, or we all have different lenses and paths that we put onto different words that are put to us, whereas when there's no words, it's like there's a chance for better understanding to occur.
Yeah, I think because I'm surrounded by birds down here. I know you're in a rural context as well, which is great. And I like, it's almost obviously that birds will communicate via birdsong, but I actually think a lot of the time they're just doing it in the same way we will sing spontaneously. I think it's joy. When the birdsong and at the sunrise, they don't need to tell people that the sun's coming up, right? And that's why I'm going, what is music? Is music like human birdsong? Is it a way we participate? It can do all these things like communicate, but when you look at the biological and scientific evidence for things that happen when we sing together, which is obviously my next question, it's the observed effects are greater than the scientific description of why that might be. I think there's something, this is what I mean, I think there's something philosophical about music as a thing that humans do that is like what birds and dolphins and things do. I think it's about creation rather than do you know what I mean? I think that's why I think what I'm trying to work out what music is it is. I had a doctor, a light doctor who, does light therapies on the show last year. And I asked him the same question, like, what is light? And we actually got to like, nobody knows. Like, you think you know what it is until you try to describe it, but you can only
Mm.
describe it by referencing other things. And I think music is one of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think it's, yeah, I mean, look, I love birds. I was a member of the Bird Observers Club when I was a teenager. And, and you listen to the birds and their special little songs and everything like that. And yeah, and I think humans tend to underestimate, I mean, some humans tend to underestimate just how much music is part of their lives. Like people often go, I'm not creative, I'm not musical. But actually, often you'll hear them bursting into song in the shower, or
Yeah.
the thought of not having the radio on in their car listening to music would be foreign to them. So you don't actually have to be a musician to love music or to appreciate it. And music is much more a part of our lives than what we think. And even if we don't listen to music ourselves, well, then, as you say, there's birdsong and other kinds of, music that infiltrates every single element of our lives, even dogs barking,
Yeah.
you know.
It's sort of sonic expressions of joy a lot of the time, and I think that
Mm.
and it's you have a very horrible life if you're not experiencing sonic expressions of joy. But you're right, people think of
Oh,
music as jingles heard in the supermarket or popular culture songs, but that's not it. It's bigger and
mm,
very difficult to describe because it's metaphysical,
mm,
I suppose.
it's sort of like yes, I mean, it's part of the entire sensory experience of being alive, music. I mean, it's everything from the sound of the wind, really, to, you know, the sound of the rain, to the dogs, to the birds and the ocean waves. And this is all the music of our lives, I think.
Yeah. And what happens, I love this stuff. What happens when we sing together, Tanya?
Well, that's a miracle when we sing together. So, in my TED talk, which is called How Singing Together Changes the Brain, I talk about the incredible neuroscientific benefits of singing that basically show that when we sing together, our brains fire off neurotransmitters like oxytocin, dopamine, other um, neurotransmitters that connect us more to one another and which make us smarter, healthier, happier, and more creative. So the right temporal lobe of our brain fires up. And it also improves our memory, language, and concentration, and increases the neuroplasticity of our brain. So that, particularly, if we have memory loss or some, diseases of aging or whatever, music and particularly singing and singing together has been shown to really help in the process of healthy aging, and to really stem some of diseases like dementia, Alzheimer's, and also it's obviously been well proven to heal people from strokes, to reclaim their language and so on. The other remarkable thing about singing together is that there's been studies that show that not only do we start to breathe together, but our hearts start to beat together when we sing together in choirs and so on. And the other thing about singing together is it connects us more to the right side of our brain, which is the side of our brain that is more responsible for, our memory, our intuition, creativity, imagination. The right side of our brain is like our human battery charger. And unfortunately, particularly in this, world now, we tend to be overwhelmed by facts and figures and tend to spend a lot of time in the left side of our brains being very logical, analytical, rational, and overwhelmed by too much information. Whereas really, the left side of our brain also keeps us quite separated from one another, whereas the right side of our brain connects us to one another and all that is. And it's really where we recharge ourselves as human beings. And singing is one of the great activities that really fires up the right side of the brain, as does dancing. Meditation has been well known to do that, and walking in nature, hugging our loved ones. There's a range of different activities. But singing, has also been part of our human civilization since the beginning. We've sung and danced together. Tribes have sung and danced to ward off their enemies. So it's very much part of the DNA of, our human body, our human instrument, our human community and social life since the beginning. And unfortunately, you know, singing has become a bit stigmatized. It's like people, oh no, I'd never sing. you know, in front of anyone else. And a lot of people have got blocks about singing. They have been told, like I was when I was a kid, that they should never sing by someone. And if I had $10 for every person that had told me that, seriously, I'd be very wealthy by now, because it's literally tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, have told me that. And these messages just stick with us, unfortunately. So I've had a lot of people. I used to run a very successful singing teaching practice, and I'd have a lot of people in their 60s and 70s sometimes who'd come to me and say, you know, when I was 15 or 20 or 30, my mum, someone told me not to sing, and unfortunately they just didn't until that time. And many of them actually had very good voices. And it was just, you know, I've had people that I trained when they were older adults who've then gone on to perform, but they had these messages that they weren't good enough. And I do a lot of keynote speaking, as you know, and I also lead a lot of workshops, one team, one voice workshops with corporations. And sometimes there might be more than 1,000 people, you know, at the keynote, and then as part of a workshop where I and a colleague get everyone singing in 3 or 4 part harmony. And if you ask the group how many of them have been told they can't sing, invariably about 80 to 85% of the participants put up their hand. So our voices have been silenced. I talk about this a lot in the TED Talk, and it isn't doing us any good, because people, it's not just our singing voice, it's our voice is symbolic of ourselves. You know, our human instrument is our body. Our voice is really symbolic of our meaning and purpose. So when our voice is silenced and we don't speak out and we don't express our emotions, that's actually affecting, you know, who we are and our sense of self and our sense of identity. And it also affects our relationships with others, because it often means we're not communicating as clearly and as openly as we might, that we're afraid of being judged or silenced further. And so we don't sometimes choose, you know, not to speak. I mean, you know, of course, we all, sometimes it's appropriate not to speak out. But a lot of the time it would be valuable for more of the public to actually have an opinion. And, you know, we've seen through this current pandemic that a lot of the population has actually been quite silent. Even though a lot of people do privately hold opinions, they don't share them. And that's not necessarily a good thing for humanity.
No, definitely not. I'm just want to return to singing together, and you mentioned dancing and how this is sort of a primal human thing. This is the science, or the sort of net effects that people experience when singing together are another one of those examples, I think, of it being metaphysically significant, because what they are is ceremony, right? And you won't find an indigenous group anywhere on the planet who thinks ceremony is optional. And I don't know if you know who Alberto Viola is, but he's a
oh, I know him very, very well. I'm a huge fan.
Well, because he says ceremony is basically the only way we affect brain change, and so there's something about humans and it's almost like, because of how we live, we have the science for that says, oh look, there are some chemical markers that indicate improvement, or memory recall markers that indicate improvement in choral groups, and you say, okay, that's kind of interesting, but what that says about like the universe, I think, is even more interesting, right? Which is, are you familiar with Lynn McTaggart?
I've heard of her work. I'm not so familiar with her work, though.
Amazing woman, but she has these worldwide intention experiments, and the sort of stuff, because I want to talk to you about the you know, the with one voice stuff and so on in a minute. But she has these groups around the world, and there's a whole bunch of data for people who do things like intend together, or pray together, or meditate together. You end up in the benign and good sense that, that you sort of instantly see that kind of brain entrainment, where they're all operating at similar levels, and a sense of coherence among them. But consequently, you get all the positive health markers, but good things happen in their lives. So there's this sort of funny, Lynn McTaggart says that altruism is a bulletproof vest. So being with other people and doing things for them has this peculiar net effect in people's health, and even kind of strange stuff like life outcomes, which I know, watching some of the videos in preparation for this, have happened with some of your singing groups. But and I just, when you look at something like a group of people singing together, it's almost like in the modern world we are under describing what that actually is, because what that actually is like hugely important, and something that humans have always done except for now.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely critical. I couldn't agree with you more. And what we actually find with our with one voice choirs, which I'll explain in a moment, is that for many people, you know, the religion sort of doesn't exist for a lot of people anymore, so they don't go to churches or synagogues or places of prayer and worship where traditionally, you know, a ceremony would take place. And so other types of ceremony in life and rites of passage are so important for humans. And we have really lost that to a large extent. And I agree that Alberto's work in that space is really formative. And the importance of ceremony can never be underestimated. And yes, I mean, in terms of the choirs, I'll just explain what the choirs do. But so 12 years ago, I founded my second charity. So my first charity, the Song Room, brings music and music learning and creative learning and arts experiences to children in schools around Australia to improve their outcomes in numeracy, literacy, well-being, self-esteem, you know, and they attend school as a result. So you start to see these massive improvements in kids' attendance at school, in their English and maths, as a result of participating in, I guess, a more ceremonial way of connecting with their peers and with their community, which many of them are devoid of because of, you know, the way the world has evolved, especially in Western nations of late. And then with our With One Voice choirs, what we do with those, so that's Creativity Australia, my charity that followed the Song Room, was we bring together people like you and I, so doctors, lawyers, teachers, retirees, with migrants, job seekers, people with depression and disabilities of all faiths, backgrounds, aged 9 to 90, in communities all around Australia. And we sing together, so we experience the incredible neuroscientific benefits of singing, but we also share supper together, and we share what's called a wish list program, where people in the choirs can make wishes to one another for what they need in life, which could be anything from, you know, help with a resume, finding a job, finding accommodation, a partner, someone to walk to the station with, someone to teach them English, whatever it happens to be. And the wishes are read out by a wish list coordinator at each of the choirs. And instantly people start to put up their hands and say, oh, look, I can help with this wish or this wish. And so gradually what happens is people start to help one another as a community of support. And so not only are these communities singing together, which is symbolic and important, but through that singing process, these choirs are much more than choirs because of the wish list. And supper. Supper is also very important because actually, you know, breaking bread with other people is also another way of, you know, it's a ceremony. You know, you can sit down at dinner and hold hands, and you can, not that I'm saying they do this at the choirs, but, you know, there's a certain ceremony about breaking bread together as well, of course, as there has been throughout religions, you know, since the beginning of human civilization. So it is remarkable to see these choirs. And, you know, literally hundreds of people have got jobs. We've had marriages occur. You know, people have got free guitar lessons, for English lessons, lifelong friendships. Many people have been able to go off their medications because for many people, these weekly choir sessions are like, and I hasten to use the word church, but it's like a weekly religious session in a way, except it's not a religion. It's a universal
it's more
state of
fundamental, right?
consciousness
Like
to come together.
that's why I like the
Yeah,
word ceremony. It's more fundamental. So
yeah,
ceremony is older than
yeah,
religion, and so religions have it, but
yeah,
you don't necessarily you don't need a book for it.
yeah.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, so they're like these weekly ceremonies that provide people with a sense of self, a sense of place, a haven. You know, they provide food as well. They provide support. It's way more than just singing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
But also the net effect of it.
and
I just think sorry, carry on. I think it's
oh
literally a
no,
magical ceremony that performs miracles.
no, it is, and I call it the weekly miracle. And um, you know, one of the remarkable things about these choirs is the way they do bring people together who are very diverse in what I call positive human collisions, where so that for me means, and I talk about this a lot in my TED talk, but you know, we tend to hang out with people who are similar to us most of the time, you know, similar backgrounds, educational backgrounds, similar financial backgrounds. We even tend to wear similar clothes, you know, we talk similar types of things, read similar books and so on. And what we're doing here is we're deliberately saying, well, no, let's bring together the most diverse people that we can. Let's bring together CEOs with job seekers and migrants and, you know, and people with disabilities, with people with depression. Don't let's lump everyone together. Let's not put all the old people in one choir and all the people with disabilities in another and all the homeless people in another. You know, we're all part of this human family. And so for people to feel a sense of belonging to everything is really important. And no one wants to be stigmatized and say, oh, well, you go in with, you know, you go in with all the poor people or all the old people. I mean, it's like, you know, we're only as old as we feel anyhow, but there's something really beautiful to see these groups come together, the whole tapestry of what makes up the human family of all ages and faiths and backgrounds, and to see everyone, to see those divisions vanish between people and for them all to be singing in harmony together. There's something very symbolic and ceremonial about that. And the stratas that have formed in society tend to vanish away, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's remarkable. How does one? So here's the thing. How does one decide to start a charity? Like, talk us through, because you've started several. How do you just like in the supermarket one day and you're like, you know what?
Mm. Yeah, it's a fit of madness, definitely. My mother would definitely. No, I mean, it really, like, just, like when I started the first charity, the Song Room, that really occurred because Potpourri were performing for a lot of privileged schools, you know, private schools who could afford to pay our fees, and we'd go into these private schools. And then we did a couple of performances for public primary schools and secondary schools, and that they were so appreciative. And I thought to myself, you know, how can we make it possible for all these other schools and children to have access to these sorts of music, and again, a form of ceremony too. Because performances are also a form of ceremony, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And so what happened there was there didn't seem to be any other way to get what we were doing out to these schools unless we set up a charity and provided subsidised performances. So silly me, I thought, okay, let's start a charity. And you know, I had a great mentor in Dame Elizabeth Murdoch, who had always been very supportive. And Potpourri had sung at her 90th birthday and so on. So she donated $5,000 to Song Room, really. It was my first charity. And then we started to get a whole range of other donors, and the Song Room has been going for over 20 years now and has reached over 1 million Australian children with music and arts programs that have increased their learning and wellbeing and all sorts of things. But it took every charity that I've started, and I mean, you know, after that first one, I don't really know how I could have thought of starting a second one, Creativity Australia, now third one, Mind Medicine Australia. It's like, because they're so hard. Actually, it's one of the most difficult things you could ever do, because you're starting with nothing, firstly, you know, so there's nothing there, otherwise you wouldn't be starting it. there is no money, there is nothing, there's no people, there's no employees, there's nothing. So you have to capture the imagination of philanthropists, which doesn't necessarily mean, just large philanthropists. It could be anyone who wants to make a difference in the community. We have a mix of small and large philanthropists for everything I've ever created. So, with Mind Medicine Australia, we have people who donate as little as $5 or $10 a week through to people who might donate, a couple of $1,000s a week. But raising the funds is absolutely very, very hard and constant and relentless. And, I don't like doing that very much, but you don't really have an option. And then the other thing is, putting teams together who are committed to a not-for-profit charitable model is critical as well. And of course, when people work for a charity, they don't generally get paid as much as they do in, the corporate market, for example, or for governments and so on. So you've got to find people who are really cause-focused, who genuinely want to make a difference to the community. And once you find those people, there's some amazing people that, work within our various charities and who are very committed to change. And I think that since I started the first charity 20 years ago, being a social entrepreneur has become more of a popular career, I guess. I think there's more entrepreneurs out there who don't just want to make money for the sake of making money, but actually want to give back to the community. And it's really inspirational to see some of the young people, young social entrepreneurs who are coming through, who really are committed to social change. And also to see some of the commercial entrepreneurs actually who have set up wonderful foundations and who are quite active philanthropists. They're not just writing checks, they're actually involved either setting up charities or supporting charities.
Which that's true. There's some good ones as well as some not good ones out and about at the moment, for sure. So you mentioned Mind Medicine Australia, which is a charity. I'll get you to talk about in a second. But I mean, give people the backstory of how you first became aware of, I guess, psychedelics and your first experiences with them, because it's the singing thing I kind of get. Professional musician and so on. So of course there's going to be charities like With One Voice or projects like With One Voice and so on. This one, it's the same thing, arguably, because it is actually about returning human to a true state of health by kind of restoring things that are authentically ours, like ceremony and medicine and so on.
Yeah.
So they are the same. They're still healing journeys, right?
Well, singing and psychedelics have been around since the beginning of human civilization.
Yep.
And ironically, both of them have been stigmatized in their own way. So, singing, as I said, there's often a taboo about people singing or speaking in public, and a lot of people have blocks about that. And similarly, unfortunately, psychedelics and unfortunately beneficial drugs have been vilified in a way which is very unfortunate, and has meant that humanity itself has been set back, in the case of psychedelic therapies, by at least 50 years. So historically speaking, psychedelic medicines have been used since day one. You can see them in the archaeology of, Greece, Rome, ancient Rome, through South America, and they're still used in tribes around the world, as you'd be familiar with Peru and Mexico and many parts of South America and the Netherlands. There's psilocybin truffles that have never been illegal in the Netherlands, for example. So we have this major inconsistency around the world. But famously, in the 50s and 60s, psychedelics were considered the next big thing in psychiatry. And Stan Grof, the famous psychiatrist, famously said that psychedelics would be for psychiatry what the microscope is for biology and medicine, or the telescope for astronomy. They were considered that perspective. and they were used to heal over 40,000 patients for a range of conditions in the 50s and 60s. And unfortunately, President Nixon politically had his war on drugs in 1970 and made all of these drugs, except for alcohol, cigarettes. And alcohol is by far the most dangerous drug to self and others, but he made all of the other drugs illegal. And unfortunately, many of the other nations in the world followed suit. And he knew that he was lying about the science, you know, that so him and his advisors were fully aware that these had massive potential to heal what even then was a growing mental illness, you know, epidemic, nowhere near the scale that it's on now. But essentially what that meant was that all research funding pretty much stopped at that point. And until the last 10 or 15 years, where there's been this renaissance in research in this space, there's been fundamentally no research occur. And in that space of time, we've seen this massive increase in loneliness, social isolation, depression, a range of mental illnesses. You know, the most significant disconnection and disruption in our communities that we've ever seen, massive division between people. So it's been a terrible and growing concern. And now, of course, with the current pandemic, we're seeing this massive, you know, shadow pandemic, as many people call it, of mental illness. And we simply do not have the treatments, existing treatments, that are going to help to relieve the suffering that's in our community available at the moment. Apart from psychedelic medicines, which offer the best hope to relieve the suffering of literally, you know, hundreds of millions of people around the world. And my husband and I really were very lucky to come upon these medicines by chance. I read an article by Michael Pollan in the New Yorker called The Trip Treatment back, it was about 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. And it was about a Holocaust survivor who was having an end-of-life trauma and stress and depression, and talked about his experiences with psilocybin and, you know, his remission from his trauma and his mental illness and so on. And I read the article and I just said to my husband, we really should go and try this. There was just something about it that resonated with me. And so we found a guide in the Netherlands. We tried to get into the trials in the UK, but there were no trials for healthy patients at the time, and we don't have a particular mental illness diagnosis. But that being said, all of us carry trauma. You know, my husband's father had committed suicide when he was 13, and I'm the daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. So we all carry epigenetically trauma that has come down through our, you know, from families and throughout civilization. And we're all carrying this.
I would even say more than epigenetic. I mean, I'm sort of very up on this research, but we have people who do like ancestral lineage healing on the show and so on. I think that it's one of those things that is more than how we describe it. So yes, absolutely. If you have, you know, as you say, Holocaust survivors in the family and so on. We all. Was an English artist was on the show just before Christmas, Lucy Delix. She lives in Peru, and when she was going through her psychedelic stuff, she had the same thing, all this ancestral trauma to process. So whilst you may not be in this life, you may be blessed in this life to not have to have gone through something like that. It's still in your field.
No, it is. It's in all our fields. And you know, when I did, and every time that I have worked with these medicines, stuff from the field, the ancestral trauma does actually come through, and I see things and I think, how I've never even seen that before. Like, where's this coming from? It's like from a completely other lifetime. You know, I've seen all sorts of sweeping planes with thousands of people, you know, look to be from the 14th century, the 13th century. I don't even know where it's all coming from. And I look at it and I think, is that something I've seen in my life in a movie? How come it's appearing? But it's appearing because it's in the field, and the medicine somehow help you to tap into that, and then they help you to clear a lot of that baggage, I guess. We're all carrying this baggage along with us all the time.
And it's instant, right? So I assume it is for you. We'll have the article, if you're listening to this, that the Medium article you wrote about your experiences in the Netherlands. But what's so transformative?
Yeah.
I mean, you can give, and you should give, psilocybin to people who are on suicide watch, because that person still will need to, heal their life, but they will not be suicidal at the end of it, right?
Well, that's right. Provided that, with Mind Medicine Australia, of course, we do advocate that people go through these experiences with, professional guides, because I don't want to advocate to people that you go out and do this on your own.
Sure.
Certainly not for the first few times that you would do it.
But is that because that's what I assumed the next step from going to the Netherlands and finding out for yourself and your husband, like, wow, this is transformatively healing, was the thinking. Then does it follow everyone should do this? And you go, wait a minute, everyone should do this, but it should be done in a way that can reach the most people fastest, which is through existing, do you know what I mean? Like by altering the legal framework rather than coming back to Australia and growing a bunch of mushrooms in your garage, right?
Oh, well, absolutely. So firstly, my husband had also set up 2 charities, and so, as you know, I'd set up 2, and the experience that we had was so profound, like the sense of oneness, of connection, an enormous sense of love and eternal light, but also that sense of, that feeling that everything's part of you, you're part of everything, everything's part of you, everything that you can see, is part of you. I've never looked at any blade of grass or tree or bird or the sky the same ever since that first ceremony. It changed everything that I was ever to see again. And I was very nervous before I did this ceremony. I thought, is it going to destroy my brain? Is it this? Is it that? Because, even though I'd never really known about psychedelics, and my husband and I had never actually taken any drugs at all before this experience in our entire lives. I don't even drink alcohol or coffee or anything like that. So for us, it was like completely like being shot into space, I suppose. When we had this experience, it was just so profound because we had no other experience with drugs of any kind. And so it was really interesting then to see, how differently we viewed the world. But we actually didn't do our second experience until a year later with the same guide from the Netherlands. And because, we had so much to absorb and take in and integrate, very important, the integration of these sorts of very meaningful experiences in the months and, certainly in the days and months following the experience is critical. So that, it's not just an incredible experience at the time, but it's like it has a lasting impact on your life and how you live your life and the decisions that you make thereafter. For example, we barely ate any meat before, but we certainly don't eat meat now. And there's just so many other things that we don't do now and things that we do now as a result of the ceremony. But when we had the second ceremony, it was even more profound. It was an even higher dose. And at that point, both of us just said, well, this is no fluke, like second time around, this is even more profound. We need to make sure that every person gets access to these medicines. And that's when we started to really do a lot of research. We started to meet a lot of the researchers from around the world, the scientists, the doctors. We started to go to conferences and events around the world. And then it came to us, given that we'd already set up 4 charities, that we were going to set up a charity, because in actual fact there was nothing in Australia or even really in the Asia Pac region that was a formal organisation that would be able to make sure that these medicines could get to people in a legal way.
Yeah.
So there was, there's psychedelic societies and they do great work. But they're focused more on recreational use, and we were really focused on, well, how can we make sure that this gets to the people who are suffering the most? And most people don't want to do something that's illegal, even if they're desperate. I mean, if they're really desperate, some people go and search underground, but then there's risks. So we thought, how can we remove the risk? How can we make sure that everyone who needs these treatments gets them? And that's really become our mission, to make sure that we can alleviate the suffering of millions of people through making these medicines available, accessible, affordable, above ground, through the medical system, so that they become a first line of treatment that a doctor would offer you if you're suffering with some kind of sadness, anxiety, trauma, addiction, whatever it might happen to be. I mean, as you probably know, these medicines are not only in breakthrough therapy status with the FDA in the US for treatment of depression in the case of psilocybin, and for PTSD in the case of MDMA-assisted therapy. But they're also now being researched for addictions, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders like anorexia, dementia and Alzheimer's, cluster headaches. These drugs, medicines, let's call them medicines, and it's very important that we do, have the most enormous potential to heal humanity in the most critical time in humanity's, journey so far. And so that's why we've also put in rescheduling applications. So we're putting rescheduling applications to reclassify psilocybin and MDMA from Schedule 9, which is prohibited substance, to Schedule 8, which is controlled medicine. So again, it's important to say that, no patients would ever get to take these medicines home. They would always be supervised by professional therapists in a clinical environment that's made, that is more comfortable and more beautiful than a traditional hospital room. But nevertheless, it's important that, people know that they're guided through this process and that they have enough integrative sessions with psychotherapists to follow the medicinal experiences, that they can genuinely start to bring these strategies that they learn from the experience back into their lives, that they can break out of their rigid and repetitive negative thinking to become agents for their own healing and empowered for their own healing process.
Definitely. And it's exciting it's happening in Australia because I don't know if I mentioned when we were planning the call, but he's retired now, but my father's a psychiatrist. And for the course of his career, he would go to conferences overseas, because he went to one very early on in his career in the US, and he realized they were about 15 years ahead of us. 10 to 15 years. He's just sort of stopped going to Australian conferences and would go to them around the world. And that was very good for his career personally, because he was at the cutting edge of stuff. And you mentioned at the beginning of the show, or about halfway through, that there is a lot of research being done around the world, the beneficial applications of these medicines. Not in Australia. we do have that kind of lag, and so it's really exciting to see something like Mind Medicine Australia here, so that it can cohere and amplify it, because the medical field in general, but certainly psychiatry, lags here, and so
it really does. Yeah. No, and it's really important too. Like, we have a lot of psychiatrists on our advisory panels and as ambassadors and on our board and so on. And, many of them acknowledge that they can't get their patients well with existing treatments. We have many psychiatrists who say to us, if I bring 20 people into my practice today, in 2 years' time, I'll only get one well. Others will either have dropped out of the system, or will still be on my books, but I can't get them well with the current treatments. And, we have Dr. Simon Longstaff on our board, who's head of the Ethics Centre in Sydney, the Australian Ethics Centre, and he says that it's unethical for these medicines not to be made available to Australians who are suffering in medically controlled environments. You know, what possible reason is there for us to withhold these medicines from those who are suffering and in many cases have been suffering their entire lives?
Yeah,
And who just want to contribute and have a meaningful life that's not filled with misery.
absolutely.
How can we possibly withhold these medicines any longer? Like, we've already got this lost 50 years, and it's unfortunate, you know, that some researchers just think, oh, we need to do more research, more research, more research. Well, you know, research is great, but no one's suggesting that there shouldn't be research. But at the end of the day, we need to make these medicines available now for the millions who are suffering, because all the studies show that not only are they getting 60 to 80% remission rates, and that's versus about 20 to 30% with existing treatments, but they're also considered to be extremely safe, non-addictive, non-toxic. So in over 120 recent trials, there's been no adverse events whatsoever in medically controlled environments. So they're actually much safer for patients, you know, in the right environments, medically controlled environments, I reiterate, than a lot of the current existing psychiatric medicines,
Absolutely.
which have massive side effects and often lead to irreversible brain change and so on.
They do, because it's it's not quite true, but it's kind of true. Western or Rockefeller medicine doesn't actually cure anything, right? I mean, we can cut bits out of people, but it's a game of symptom masking. It's a battlefield medicine of patching you up and sending you back out into the world rather than fixing it. And I know completely what you mean, that psychiatric medicine, these things are cures rather than masking symptoms by changing brain chemistry that you think very often wrongly is associated with certain emotional effects. Like, people still talk about SSRIs like that hasn't been but people, I still see stuff about the serotonin hypothesis, and you think this is, yeah, it's very clunky. And I agree with you on the urgency, especially at the moment. These epidemics of depression and anxiety are literally fatal at the moment.
Oh no, they are.
You know, it's
They are.
the amount of people that the suicide spikes we're seeing around the world over the last 10 months and so on. It's
Tragic.
urgent, and
Tragic.
yeah, it is. And I agree with you. It's like there's,
Oh,
and the ethicist, like, what possible ethical reason could there be to not have? Yeah, I think it's a peculiar twist of fate that the urgency, because it was gaining momentum in different sort of legal regimes around the world, right? In different ways, not just in treatment, but various states are decriminalizing and eventually legalizing psilocybin and so on. So kind of all moving in approximately the same direction at a time where, for whatever, it just couldn't be more urgent with
yeah, that's right.
yeah, with what the Western world has gone through over the last 10 months.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, like, you know, obviously suicide rates were bad even before this epidemic. And you know, as I said earlier, I mean, we've seen a growing epidemic of loneliness and social isolation and mental illness for a significant period of time now. And we owe it to humanity,
Yeah,
really. And you know, we're not going to be able to solve all of the wicked problems we're facing, COVID, the environment, any of these sorts of huge challenges, unless people are well enough to actually proactively want to fix things. If there's too many people who are unwell, and it's more and more, I mean, like, recent statistics, some recent research showed that, you know, 4 out of 5 Australians say their mental health has deteriorated during this crisis. You know, we're not really in a position where we can afford to have more men on the bench, so to speak. You know, we actually all need.
Yeah, 1 in 4 Americans under 25 have considered suicide seriously since 1 in 4, 25% of them since this happened. So it's terrible. It's just so awful. Yeah, which is why, I mean, the research, or the work Mind Medicine Australia is doing. So it's applying for rescheduling. What else does it do?
Yeah. Yeah, so Mind Medicine Australia is also, so we have 4 key pillars to build the ecosystem for uptake of these medicines in the region. The first pillar is education and awareness. So we have lots of free webinars. We have screenings of wonderful documentaries. We've got a major global summit in November with some of the leading researchers and scientists and psychiatrists coming to Melbourne from around the world. We have chapters all around Australia. I noticed you said you're in Tassie, and we actually have a Tassie chapter, but we have 30 chapters in Australia and New Zealand that, community by community, build awareness, educate, raise funds for this movement and so on. Then, of course, we speak to MPs and the media and all of that sort of thing. So that's all in the awareness part of what we do, in the education part. The second part of our strategy is training therapists. So we have launched the very first ever certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies in the Southern Hemisphere. It's launched, the first intake is starting at the end of January. And we have a wonderful cohort of psychiatrists, psychologists, GPs, social workers, mental health nurses, what else? Psychotherapists, occupational therapists, social work. Yeah, the whole gamut.
Is that online, I guess? Is that online delivered, or?
It's online and intensive aspects for the training of the therapies.
Cool.
And then our second intake's in July, and then we have more intakes subsequently.
Just for people listening,
and then
is it still open if you're, say, a social worker in Australia? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So all the criteria on the website, mindmedicineaustralia.org. We're a registered charity, so people can, of course, donate to us and support us, and we need that support because my husband and I are philanthropists. We donate our time and money to this entirely, but we can't do it alone. It's this is a big, hairy, audacious project. And it's a major mission to change the mental health paradigm of treatment, which is, which requires a lot of support. So people can still register for intakes 2, 3, 4, and so on, if they meet the criteria. And then the third part of our strategy is the development of an Asia Pacific Centre in Emerging Mental Health Therapies. So that will be in partnership with universities for applied research and development, manufacturing and agribusiness sort of goals of growing and manufacturing these medicines in Australia, and then also looking at the whole ecosystem. So there's the fourth pillar is the rescheduling, the SASB, which is Special Access Scheme. So these medicines are currently available on a case-by-case basis to psychiatrists and doctors for patients that are treatment resistant in Australia. And FDA has provided some approvals for use of psilocybin and MDMA in Australia for that purpose as well. The interim decision from the TGA will be, sorry, did I say TGA? TGA. The interim decision of the TGA on the rescheduling applications will occur on February the 3rd, and the final decision in about May.
Are you confident?
So fingers and toes crossed. It's hard, it's hard to know. Look, we've seen hundreds of letters from both doctors and patients, and if you read them, like pretty much my whole team were in tears reading a lot of them. So if they count for anything, yes, but it's funny how scientific bodies can be, and it would be pretty sad if Australia didn't reschedule them at this point. Given that they're going to be prescribable medicines in the US and other parts of the world within the next year to 2 years,
yeah, exactly.
It would be a real shame. But then the SASB, the Special Access Scheme, also enables access, but it would be much easier to have a more uniform approach to these medicines if the rescheduling occurs. And, then, we have a whole range of other work we're doing, rollouts with clinics. So there's a number of clinics around Australia who are interested in working, with these medicines for their patients. And we're setting up protocols with a number of different clinics around Australia so that there'll be many clinics, ready and firing and well, that are ready now. Really, they can already operate SASB if they need to.
Cool, that's true. Yeah. Any down here, as far as you know?
I think that some of the clinic groups we're talking to do have clinics in Tasmania. Some of them are national clinic
Oh,
groups, so
gotcha.
they've got clinics all over.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense.
Look, absolutely, we're not going to leave Tasmania out in the cold, so to speak.
Well, it's cold down here. You can't do much about that.
No, I know it's cold. I mean, look, and that is one of Peter and my goals, is to make sure that people in the most remote parts of Australia can have access to these medicines. Obviously there's a process to that, and we're doing everything we can. And, in terms of the therapists who've applied for the course, GPs, psychiatrists and others, they're people from all states of Australia who've registered for the course so far, and including from rural and regional areas of Australia. So we really encourage that. And I think there are therapists who've applied from Tasmania as well.
Very cool. And so, yeah, I just think it's the most. You guys have to be very much congratulated. I think it's really cool and really urgent work. And as it only looks like a step change for you, Tania, until you think about it. Like from the outside, it's like, oh, that's unusual to go from singing to that, but it's not. It is the same. It's the restoration of togetherness, of oneness. Like, so from an animist perspective, animists are people who believe that we should be in right relation with the cosmos. So that's trees and plants and so on. And both of these things, singing together, particularly in diverse groups, and the experience of psychedelics, it is that return to right relation.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. And I mean, if you look at singing, or if you look at psychedelics, these are part of our ancient cultures and our ancient wisdom. And the really sad thing is that we've lost so much of our ancient wisdom, our indigenous knowledge and traditions, that have traditionally been like a compass for us, and that have kept us more in right relationship to one another, where we've been a more caring and compassionate community. And there hasn't been, the level of I mean, of course, people have always been self-interested, but, there seems to be far greater division and far greater self-interest. And of course, the greatest inequality we've ever seen,
Yeah, amazing.
Well, I guess the ancient Greeks and Romans had a lot of inequality as well.
I think the top wasn't so great, even with emperors. It wasn't the same kind of, yeah.
No, well, probably not as much as the extreme wealth of
Bezos or
some of the tech giants.
No, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I think it's amazing. We're emailing and arranging this, and I've been hooked up with the Tasmania chapter, and I'm certainly going to be a monthly contributor for sure. I think what you're doing is wonderful, Tania. But for people who want to know more, or who want to help out or find out more, because there's some amazing webinars actually coming up as well. But lay it on us.
There are. Yeah, we've got Gabor Mate. Gabor Mate is just exceptional.
Yeah.
We've got him on the 23rd of February, and we have, he's exceptional, Robin Carhart-Harris, who's going to be talking about the outcomes of his trial, which is comparing an antidepressant versus psilocybin in March. It's going to be absolutely incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be amazing. So we've got some amazing webinars coming up, many of which are free, and then of course the summit in November, and yeah, there's a lot happening. We also, some of the screenings we have are wonderful. The other thing that occurred to me, Gordon, is you might want to play one or two of my songs from some of my albums, or one of my poetry albums, or
absolutely,
whatever. I don't know.
No.
I'll send you all my albums in the program. And
no, that'd be great. You sent the one that I was going to close the show with that I really liked, because it's very appropriate for like a magic and spiritual type podcast. But no, send some along. I love having musicians on the show, because it means I get to close out with some of their music and not get a copyright strike. Well, all right. So we've got obviously all of this is in the show notes. Mind Medicine Australia. Where else do they want to go if people want to learn more about you? The music stuff will be in the show notes as well. But for people who want to get involved
Yeah,
with MMA or reach out to you or find out more, where do they go? What do they do?
yeah, yeah, fantastic. Well, the best thing that they can do is mindmedicineaustralia.org is that charity website. My website is Tania de Jong, TaniaDejong.com. And then everything else, creativeuniverse.com.au and also creativityaustralia.org.au, the other charity. And yeah, and if you can share my TED Talk, Gordon, I think that would be great as well, because people might be interested in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. This one's going to have lots of really good show notes. I'm excited for it. Yeah, Tania, I'm sure you get this fairly often, but thank you and congratulations. It's amazing the work you're doing and have done and charities and so on. The world is better for people like you. So, thank you very much for what you
Thank
do
you.
and for your time. And it was a really good chat.
Oh, no, thank you. Lovely chat.